Accelerate was published earlier this year. The other two books you've read, the first edition, Mythical Man Month, was published in 1971, anniversary edition 1995. First edition of Peopleware, I think, was published in 1989. Latest edition is, I think, 2012, but it hasn't changed that much. I have both editions, both first and third editions. I hope as you've been reading Accelerate, you've noticed that while some of the terms have changed and there are some new things, it's a lot of the same themes coming up. It's important to recognize that the core problems and the core issues in software engineering are pretty much timeless, even when you have new practices involved. Now, management practices. Focus here is on lean management practice. A lot of these chapters are going to talk about management practices and culture. You'll find a lot of that actually has very strong echoes throughout Peopleware as well. But some of the practices that they have found that have aided organizations becoming high performance are limit the current work in process. Take small bites. Do it, with something you can do in a week's time. Why do you think that's important? Or why do you think that's useful in terms of productivity? Yeah.
Did you forget what you learned by the time it's time to put it back together?
That's often the case. If you forget what you've learned by the time you put everything back together, what else?
It's easier to motivate yourself when the goal is in sight.
Yep. You get rapid feedback. Good.
When you let people go off and do their own idea of what the project is for a really long period of time, if they ever do something, you can't really integrate that together.
Yep. Which is also why you have associated with this practices like trunk-based development, meaning that you force them to merge their source code in frequently. Yeah.
That's my question about, because you said the work in progress was a small bite. I have a really hard time for what we do in our project, getting it to be small enough bites, because then the example they were talking about trunk as early as like a day's worth of work to bring it back again. I guess I just don't understand. It sounds like the right thing to do. I don't know how I could do it.
Well, and recognize you're not working full-time on this project.
Yeah.
This is, and that's something to keep in mind in trying to implement this. You're mostly working like 7 to 8 hours a week, if that. Some of you are actually putting in more than that, but I'd say the average is probably 6 to 8 hours a week. That's far different than when you're working 40 hours a week, as far as how to chunk it. So keep that in mind in your own application and sort of tuck this away for when you get out in the quote, real world, unquote. Recommendation to implement lightweight change management process. Now this is very interesting because they say use a lightweight change approval process based on peer review. In other words, it's like, let's do this differently. Let's change this feature. Now, if it's an internal project, if it's a small team, you can pretty much go to the rest of the team and say, hey, I think we should do this way. In fact, some of you have talked about that in your presentations today. We started off doing X, we tried to get there, we ended up doing Y. Where I have questions about this is when you're doing work for an external customer. When you're doing work for an external customer, part of your challenge is getting the customer to actually understand, review, and pass off what you're trying to do. And a lightweight change process can lead to you going off in one direction. And if you're not getting it constantly in front of the customer comes back and says, no, that's not what we wanted at all. But again, this ties back to the idea of you want to get this in front of the customer as often as possible. Now let's talk about visual management. One of the problems we've talked about in software estimation and software metrics is the visibility problem. How hard it is to know just what's going on. And the big stress of these chapters in Accelerate is having dashboards and visual displays, whether they're digital or whether it's a whiteboard or a project board where you have got Post-it notes up there and so on. Something that visualizes what's going on and where things stand. Because you have a real problem, and this actually gets back to what Finn was saying. You can have a real problem where developers go off and work hard for several weeks, and you come back to try and pull things together, and you suddenly find out that their efforts have been diverging, that they don't reintegrate well. I mean, some of you simply run into that problem within these very short projects. It's like, well, you know, we divided it up and then we tried to bring it all together, and it turns out we couldn't make it all fit. So you need to find ways to get greater visibility into what you're doing. Again, small batches make workflow visible. Gather and implement customer feedback. If you're going to do lightweight change control, this is absolutely essential. The customer's got to somehow see this on a, you know, if not a daily basis, something close to it. Because one of the biggest problems with customers is that they don't know what they want until you put something in front of them. And then they say, you know, the phrase which I've told you I've literally heard before is, we want it to work just like the old system but better. Even though that literally may not be possible. I actually reviewed as an expert witness a project that was a actually very successful consulting / software company that was adapting their software tools to replace this old legacy Unix-based single programmer system. And the old system, all it could do was uppercase, so all the fields, you know, whatever you typed always got entered as uppercase. And the consultants did this, you know, great system, and they had users come back and say, well, we want the fields to all be entered uppercase. And they said, there's a cap lock scheme. And they said, we don't care. We shouldn't have to worry about the cap lock scheme. And they said, you realize it will be saved in uppercase in the database, which means when you start doing letters and so on, everything's uppercase and you'll have to, we don't care. So be prepared for users who can truly be irrational. Team experimentation. This gets back to the idea of allow teams to try out new ideas, but you have to coordinate with these other practices, which is making it visible, knowing what's going on. You don't want someone to go off for 6 weeks to develop a new idea, come back and suddenly he or she has not done what you need them to do, has what they think is a nifty, cool idea, doesn't integrate with everything else, and you've just lost a month and a half. Making work sustainable. Okay, this whole chapter is basically about deployment pain and burnout. Deployment pain is the problem, the pain that occurs in trying to actually release a new version. How many of you have actually been involved in releasing a system into production? That is actually releasing it commercially or you know, deploying it within an organization. What are some of the problems that you have run into? What's the experience been like? Yes?
If you don't have something set up to handle it, sometimes there'll be some kind of thing that you haven't fully tested for where the system will crash, and then suddenly the system's down, and if you don't have something that'll go and restart it, you know, or even notify you of that, then you have a bunch of customers who are saying, hey, why isn't this working? You know, and then you have to stop whatever you're doing and immediately get the thing restarted.
Yep. Yeah.
I know from others' experiences where they managed data or stuff like that in production, and if they made it careless or missed something, it could potentially damage the data that's stored in production, which is constantly used in systems out there. One time, I mean, one of the people actually accidentally deleted like a good portion of data. They were able to pull it back together, but it was
painful.
It was painful for him, yeah.
Our biggest thing was we didn't have a record of the libraries we imported into our development system, so trying to push it to someone else's system became a huge problem because you have to go back through the code and find it.
And figure out what actual root is.
Sometimes, like, the biggest thing that I noticed was, like, some so bad, but like when you come up to the release, you have to kind of like take care of those emerging problems that no one wants to do.
Yep. Any other horror stories? Okay. Well, this is a problem. Are deployments feared, and are they disruptive to work? I was part of a group that went in to a major credit card company when their customer-facing website, the ones that their credit card holders use to check balances, make payments, and so on, went down for 12 hours on a Saturday. Which I mean, blew by a couple orders of magnitude their necessary uptime for the month. And it turned out the problem, their deployment, they weren't using VMs, they weren't using, this course was about 10 years ago, but they weren't using virtual machines or anything. They literally had a physical, single physical server, and they had an hour period in the morning that they could bring it down and put the new software out there. And there was a problem with the build, and they couldn't recover back to their old system because of changes they'd made. It took them 12 hours to bring the old software back up and running. I mean, one of our first recommendations was use VMs. Deploy it on a VM, cut over. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, cut back to the other VM running the working software. But this is a major company, actually a good IT department, but it was bad implementation. So, what you want are to build systems that are designed to be deployed easily into multiple environments and can detect and tolerate failures in their environments. And those are a couple of problems I've already cited. Can have various components of the systems updated independently. This gets back to loose coupling in your architecture. Allows entire state of production systems to be reproduced automatically for version control. A CI/CD, a great CI/CD system, you should be able to say, deploy version 1.25 into this environment. And it should be able, much like your problem with the libraries, it should have all the information to build and deploy into that environment. And then if you say deploy version 3.0 into that environment, it should then be able to pull the software, the components, and so on, and build and deploy them. And build intelligence into the app and the target platform so the deployment is as simple as possible. Burnout. As I've told you before, I burned out doing Sundog Frozen Legacy. Did not code for 4 years. Tried to, and just had to try to right after leaving Oasis Systems and had to walk away. I couldn't do it. I was just too badly burned out. I had the great good fortune to have a second career to fall back on, which is writing. And that pretty much, that and actually teaching here at BYU pretty much sustained me until I got back into coding again. It is possible to burn out. You have to watch yourselves and you have to watch the developers that you have responsibility over. When the job demands exceed human limits. Again, go back to people where, except for short sprints, it's hard to get sustained more than about 40 hours of really productive coding time out of people. There are people who can do it, and there are people who can do it for periods of time. I mean, like I said, the reason I burned out was I was doing 90 to 100 hours a week, week after week. I was trying to get version 2.0 out. But lack of control, inability to influence decisions that affect your job, that was one of the problems, was that there were things I thought we should be doing in a company. For example, I was convinced we should be porting Sundog to the Macintosh, and I was overruled on that. And that created extreme job dissatisfaction for me. Lack of control, that's what it said. Insufficient rewards. Again, at Oasis Systems, I had expectations in terms of royalties and so on for Sundog that weren't met in the way that I expected. I actually had a supportive work environment, absent fairness of the decision-making process, value conflict. Those weren't issues in and of themselves, but it was sufficient for me to burn out. These are all things to keep on. Anyone who has been through any of these items and work that you've done so far? Okay, good for you. It may happen. How to fight. Improve organization culture. Again, this is a big theme in peopleware. You want using terms that accelerate, you want a generative culture rather than bureaucratic or pathological. Reduce or limit deployment pain, hire and empower effective leaders, which we'll talk about in a second. Invest in best practices wisely, which means don't throw, again, pitfall. Don't say, we're going to do a DevOps and we're going to do it for this mission critical project that we have to have done in 3 months. Do pilot projects. Provide necessary training. Adopt changes to improve organizational performance. Their finding is that organizations that are using continuous delivery and lean development practices tend to have less deployment pain and less burnout. With CI/CD, it's less deployment pain because it's continuous. Checking a change, bam, goes out to the environment, and to a large extent you're not even aware of it, unless of course you really screwed up and they suddenly have to back out. But then again, one of the practices is you should be able to back out as quickly as you release. Employee satisfaction. Now, these are 2 very good questions. And I can tell you, I've asked these questions of people and got some very interesting answers. Would you recommend your organization as a place to work, and would you recommend your particular team as a place to work? I can think of someone I was talking to just the other day who, this developer, loves her manager. And her manager is the main reason why she's still at the organization, because she has serious questions about the organization. So, you know, a good manager can keep you at a less than perfect organization. And as we already talked about, a bad manager can drive you away from a very good organization. So, if you have, if these answers are both favorable, what they find is that in those situations that you tend to have, it is, it's just a ringtone. It is. Tends to correlate with good practices as far as lean production. But this is the important line. This is a realization I had long ago, because a lot of organizations will talk about, well, we expect our employees to be loyal. The question is, how loyal is the organization to the employee? Loyalty is a two-way street. I'm probably walking off the video here. An organization that is loyal, well, actually, I think I've mentioned my daughter, Chris. She was in an auto accident. A guy T-boned her. She has fractured hip. And her company said, and her manager said, no problem, work from home. You stay there the rest of November, get healed. I mean, she was already working from home 2 days a week, but they've earned a tremendous amount of loyalty. She's very, very pleased with how well the company has supported her in this manner because of that effort. Changing organizational culture and identity. You know, this really has to come from the top down to a large extent. You know, we're back to the statement I told you about, the only way to change, make change in your organization, go in every day prepared to be fired. Now, ideally, you shouldn't have to do that, but you have to be willing to stand up and say, look, here are the problems I see. And this is is what they're causing. And if people tell you to, sit down and shut up, then you have to decide, are you going to continue to raise the issue, or are you just going to look for another job? Sometimes it's, you have to go look for another job. There are sufficient pathologies either in the organization or in the management structure right above you that you either have to be willing to tolerate those pathologies or go find another place to work. The advantage you have is you work in an industry where, while it goes through up and down cycles, generally speaking, there's large demand, and if you're really good, you can usually find a job. Diversity. Diversity is an ongoing problem in technology, and I think a lot of the analysis tries to fit square pegs into round holes. I'm not particularly pleased with the fact that basically 10% of this class is female. As I've said before, all things being equal, I will hire a female software engineer over a male software engineer based on my experience over 40 years. It's a better predictor for someone who will work professionally, methodically, and turn out solid code. But it's an industry in which, well, there are two issues here. First, frankly, a lot of women are not interested in computer science. Now, there are big debates as to why that is. Is there a toxic male culture? Yeah, frankly, there is. I have good friends who work in IT, good female friends who work in IT, who it's usually not the organization, but there's usually one or two idiots who go around talking, oh, well, you're a woman, you really can't do this. My sister, my late sister, who was an outstanding software engineer and outstanding architect. I remember her working on a project at SAIC for a system that would monitor dozens, use robotics to monitor dozens of cultures and be able to detect, growth or lack of growth, report it, so on and so forth. And I asked her how it was going, and she said, well, it actually went great. She was quite successful with it. But she said, here's the problem. She says, there are other coders, other developers, other engineers that I'd like to bring in and ask their opinion on it. She says, but I know that if I do, there are managers who will assume that it was the male who came up with the clever ideas, not me. So yeah. That's the sort of stuff you're going to be facing. So I don't have a good answer for this, and frankly, there is no place for sexism, racism, or other forms of intolerance in software engineering. For teams, unless you're programming by your own lonesome, for teams to work together, there has to be mutual respect. There has to always be mutual respect. Leaders and managers. Blah, 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 blah. It's a good chapter, but it's the thing you have the least control over, which is how upper management works. Now, some of you will end up being managers, so I'm not going to worry. Read the stuff about leaders and so on. This is my only point here, and this is actually a paraphrase of Sun Tzu. A great leader cannot guarantee success, but a bad one can almost certainly guarantee failure. And that's a simple truth. Sun Tzu says, you can't always see the factors that lead to victory, but you can almost always see the factors that lead to defeat. And that is especially true for upper management in IT. Now, the roles of managers. These are all things, well, most of these are things we've talked about before. How do you keep your developers happy, growing, and productive? Educate them. And I can't tell you the battles I've had trying to advise organizations of this. I've already mentioned it here. The reaction is, oh, well, if we let them learn this new language, they'll just go get a higher paying job elsewhere. It's like, no, you misunderstand. If you don't let them learn this new language, if you don't let them go to this tech conference, Don't let them gain a certification. They will leave so they can do it. We have a number of children who work in IT, and I've always, as they've gone into it, I've always told them the same thing. I said, it's a great career. It's interesting and varied. You're going to be learning stuff for the rest of your life. You know, I have to constantly learn new things. I'm not even active. Well, I do a little coding when I need to, but you know, so it's like okay, Python, Stack Overflow, I have to do this. But the point is I constantly, as an expert witness, I get cases and they're using technologies that I know of, but I haven't particularly used, and suddenly I have to go in and say, okay, I've got to become an instant expert in this. I've got to learn this, figure this out, analyze source code, analyze sometimes hardware architecture. So it's great for keeping your mind sharp, and if you choose the right jobs, the real advantage is that you will find companies that will pay you to learn this new stuff. They'll hire you and say, hey, here you go. Here's what you need to do. You come up to speed with it, and presto, you've suddenly got another thing to put on your resume that you can do. So yes, resources, dedicated training, let the employees decide what they want to learn, encourage tech conferences. These are all things that will produce a high-functioning organization. And the trick is getting upper management to be willing to invest the time and money in it. Frankly, this is more of the same. Okay. Well, we still have some Webster 7 to go through, but we'll go through this now, since the slide is here. My Saturday latest status report, Watch From podcast, as I said, as I tweeted out, as I put out on Slack, I reset the deadlines for Peopleware, for Accelerate, for Webster 7, till I think Friday or Saturday night, close to midnight. So if you haven't had a chance to finish those. If you only partially did them, you'd like to go back and finish them, let me know. I'll reset your scores. My concern is mostly that you read this stuff. I'm less concerned about the deadlines. I just want you to have read this.
And the code review, right?
And the code review, yes. I reset the deadline for the code review because a few of you missed that. That's an individual thing. You need to review code, and someone else is saying that just go mark off that you did the code review. Midterm will open at 5 after midnight Monday morning. So we have one. Who's going to Europe? Who is it? Raise your hand. Okay. You can thank him for an opening so early, because he's going to be 7 hours ahead of us. Close at 11:59. The 3-hour time. Make sure that you're going to be uninterrupted. I don't want to be getting calls and saying, well, I got an hour into it, and then my laptop battery died. Make sure you've got power. Make sure you're uninterrupted. If nothing else, use the 2.5 hours here. As I said in the review last week, typical time for it is 1.5 to 2 hours. If you know your stuff, in particular if you use the cheat sheet slide to help guide you, you'll look at it and say, oh yeah, this, and look up and say, I know someone said it somewhere here in Brooks, oh there it is, and get your citations. Very easy to get a B. If you want an A, you're going to have to explain. You can't just put a cite there and say, this is why this is an issue and how it applies to what's described. And then once you're done with midterm, you're done until the following Monday. There's nothing new from that point on. Now let's just take a minute here. Still get you out here relatively early. Let's look at the rest of Webster 7 here. it irritates me that I have to use glasses instead of laptop. Okay. Political pitfalls. One is if you're adopting a new tool. Now, a lot of the emphasis with Accelerate is allow the team to choose their own tools. Allow them to experiment, which is good. But if it's now affecting production, go talk to management. Make sure they understand the pros and cons, why you're doing it. Because if you adopt a new technology or methodology and it fails, guess whose neck is on the line? It's yours. Underestimating the resistance. This is usually from a top-down perspective. It's sort of the it's the CTO saying we're going to use Rust, and no one else on the team has ever used Rust, and a lot of people are saying this isn't even a good fit. You don't want to underestimate the resistance among how stubborn developers can be if they have what they consider to be an inappropriate or inferior solution pushed upon them. And they're the ones who have to make it work. Don't oversell the technology or methodology. DevOps is great, but make sure management knows, well, we're going to go to a DevOps, CI/CD, trunk-based development, throw in a few more buzz phrases there. And management's like, great, so we'll be able to deploy every day, and we'll do updates, we'll get features all the time, and the answer is, well, eventually. Not next week. It's going to take us time to come up to speed, to learn how to use this, to make everything work. I know one of the teams talked about doing a continuous integration, and so on and so forth, and finding some things went well, and some things took a little longer to come up to speed than you thought they were going to take. The politics of architecture. This gets back to the whole issue of conceptual unity. A chief architect has got to be a great person, people, because you have to go around to individual developers and get them to buy into your vision of that conceptual unity. If your approach is simply to mandate from on high, it will be, you're back to the underestimating the resistance. And you have to listen, because they'll say, well, this won't work because of this. And they say, oh, there, pat them on the head. Don't worry your little head about that. This will work. No, take them seriously. Say, okay, let's talk about why it won't work. Because I've yet to meet the perfect architect. They all make mistakes. Don't get religious about the technology or methodology. And that's sort of tends to be an issue that happens with every new thing that comes along. 25 years ago, people were very religious about object-oriented technology, and everyone was very religious about Agile. And now a lot of people are very religious about DevOps. It really still boils down to getting the right people together. You can get a group of great people together, use the C language and structured programming, and still write great software. Getting on the feature release treadmill, actually DevOps in theory should enable that. But this is the issue that we've talked about where with a lot of organizations, and this is actually why CI/CD can be useful. When you've got organizations with a more traditional release schedule, you'll bust your butt, you'll get it out the door, you'll incur a lot of technical debt in the process. Some of you talked about that in your presentations, which is we did quick and dirty things to get this working at this level, and we have to go back and fix it. That's technical debt. And what will often happen is you'll incur the technical debt, and then management will say, no, we don't have time to go back and fix it. It's like, no, you don't understand. We have to go back and fix it. This won't scale beyond a certain point if we don't go back and fix it. Or we're going to run into this dead end if we don't go back and fix it. betting the company on a given technology or methodology. It's like, we're using DevOps, we're going to succeed. That's all we need. Well, no, you can use DevOps. You actually implement DevOps very well. You implement CI/CD. You've got microservices. You've got containers. You've got stuff in the cloud, and you're building a product that no one wants to pay money for. That happens. That actually happens all the time. I posted a chart on why startups fail on Slack, and I believe the number one item was lack of market demand. It's perfectly possible to build a product that not enough people want to do it. Picking the wrong horse. It could be betting on a particular technology. Pages, our target platform was the next operating system, next step. As I like to tell people, it seemed like a good idea at the time. We had lots of good company. Ashton Tate, WordPerfect, number of companies were all doing next step products, and the user base never materialized, which is why Pages closed its doors. The rest of this I'll let you read. I see some of you starting to go off. But go through, read these. You have until Saturday night. Webster 7 will be very useful for some of the midterm questions. Just go to the Pitfalls page and scan through this. Any questions at this point? This is the last chance to ask questions, except of course on Slack for the midterm. Yeah.
So the things we need to turn in this week are the podcast, the readings that we were supposed to have done by today, the Accelerated in Webster 7.
And one more status report.
And a status report, but we don't have anything due on Monday or the Saturday following.
Nope. No, that's it. Any other questions? Yes.
On the questions,
Yeah.
I haven't gone through super well, but can we reference two different things for one question?
Oh, sure. Well, yeah. The question